I'll give it to you. I'll just do the money announcement because that's all I do is the treasurer. I know I got most of you guys on the way in, but just to make an announcement, we do have a $20 membership due. My name is Adam. I'm the treasurer. That membership is good for the calendar year, January through December. Thank you to everyone who has paid already. We can also collect next month, but just keep that in mind. That'll get you the food, the day, the monthly meetings, the day, childcare. So thank you.
All right, we're gonna get rolling. Do you guys want chairs or to stand? You want to stand? Okay. All right. I'll adjust things, but come on up then. Yeah, you can do whatever you want. So tonight we have the Courtneys. Courtney times 2 this evening. And many of you are perhaps familiar with one or the other because they do a lot of work with kids in foster care. So they are from Solutions Behavioral Healthcare Professionals. Yeah. It is a mouthful. And so tonight they are going to discuss some different components of children's mental health and some strategies for managing the mental health symptoms. How do you guys want to do questions tonight? Throughout, at the end? What do you think?
Very casual in the way that we present things. So
okay.
If there's a question on the spot, feel free. Okay, this is gonna be hard. But okay. Oh, yeah. I'm naturally very loud. So
oh, and a clicker. We're getting really fancy.
Wow, we are.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Whoa. Okay.
We're fancy. But no, we like to keep these things fairly casual. If you have a question, please, by all means, ask it. If it's something that we know that we're going to be covering, we might table it for once we get to that point. But yeah, feel free to chime in whenever.
Yeah, that open conversation style. We'll ask a few questions and stuff throughout, but again, you'll notice we both talk really fast. We talk a lot and we talk very casually. So again, jump in whenever, but are we good to go to get rolling?
If there's questions, I'm going to run the mic.
Perfect.
So that the online audience can hear. We do have some people online.
Sounds
Okay,
great.
perfect.
All right.
Well, you have the clicker.
Feel very fancy.
All right.
Okay,
Go
you
ahead.
want me to start?
Yeah.
Okay, so we both downloaded a free collage app a while ago to get this done, but just some quick introduction. So my name is Courtney Leben, one of the two Courtneys. Couple things about me. This top picture right over here, hopefully everyone can see it. I was actually in the military for 6 years, and so this is a picture from my deployment. I got to cross it off the bucket list that I saw some camels. This is my fiance. We're getting married in October of this coming year, 2025. This is a picture from a little road trip we did to Washington. Actually, we're trying to cross off all the national parks on the list. So we love to explore. We basically drove the state of Washington in less than a week. So that was a little extreme, but a lot of fun. And then this picture over here is of my little nephew. He turns 3 in June. His name is Leo. And so my sister, brother-in-law, and Leo just moved back from Georgia to North Dakota in March. So now that it's wintertime, they might be regretting their decision a little bit, but I keep telling them that they're stuck here because I really love being on full-time auntie duties. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
And I'm Courtney Christenson. I'm the other Courtney here. Just a little bit about me. Yeah, I've been with Solutions now for a combined total of about 7.5 years. Outside of work, I got 2 little wild, fairly feral children at home, almost 2 and almost 4. So we stay busy at home. Free time, I like to do a lot of running. Well, I try to do some running. Love reading. And yeah, just spending a lot of time with family is really kind of what I do outside of work. Fun, awkward, weird thing is my husband's name is Dan. Her fiance's name is Dan. So like literally we are the same person. They are also both civil engineers.
Yeah.
So
Know each other. So
for the record, we didn't know each other.
At first we were like, wow, this is cool. And then it started to get creepy really fast. So
yeah. So anyway, fun random tidbit, but yeah. So like I said, little bit about just in general Solutions as an agency. So I've been with Solutions for, like I said, a combined total of about 7.5 years. I started my journey with Solutions back in our Moorhead office. back in 2013, I worked there for almost 4 years before moving out here, where then I worked for Burley County Human Service Zone as a foster care case manager for a number of years. And then back in 2021, Solutions decided to expand the services out here to the Bismarck area. So I returned. And so it's actually next week will be 4 years since we opened our Bismarck Solutions office. And it's really fun to kind of look back on where we were and where we've been, because when we started, it was literally me. I was seeing clients on my basement. Literally when I was hired, we didn't even have an office space figured out yet. And now here we are 4 years later. I mean, in our outpatient office alone, we now have 4 therapists. Courtney's been with us now for almost 3 years. But yeah, we have 4 outpatient therapists. Anyone who's been with us for a while, or any that I've seen in the past, we have an office coordinator, which means there's someone to greet you when you come in the door, which is amazing. It's truly amazing. And we will touch on some of our other services, but outside of our outpatient clinic, we've also really built our ABA, our autism clinic, and that has 10, 11, 12, I don't even know. I can't keep up with the amount of staff that's in that building now, because that has just really grown like wildfire as well in the last 4 years. So, but Solutions as an agency has been around for 25 years. We actually just celebrated our 25th anniversary. So we're a nonprofit based out of Moorhead that's really grown across Minnesota and North Dakota. And one of the biggest things with Solutions is we really focus on evidence-based practice. And so as therapists, we are all trained in evidence-based practice. We really look at using research science behind the interventions that we're using with the clients that we serve. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about those different interventions, but just wanted to give everyone just a quick little background on Solutions as a whole. So jumping into it, and this is just, we're going to go through some of this stuff fairly quickly, but we wanted to kind of give an idea of like how the background of services gets started and where everything kind of comes together essentially. And it all starts at the initial intake assessment, otherwise known as the diagnostic assessment, where we collect a ton of information. And if any of you guys have sat in on them, we literally ask 1,000 questions. And I always warn kids ahead of time, like, I'm going to talk fast. I'm going to talk a lot. I have a lot to ask, to really just get a good picture of what's going on, history of what's going on. And that really is what helps us get an idea of, is there a diagnosis here, kind of driving some of the things that we're seeing. And then through that diagnostic assessment, we come back together and we go into the treatment planning session. I think there's a slide for that, right? You're the clicker. You want me to click? Yep. And then we go into the treatment planning session. And this, as an agency, this is what we kind of consider our golden thread. When we go into treatment planning, this is what we are coming together and looking for common goals of what do we want to address through therapy, through the different interventions that we're going to be doing. This all gets tied back into the diagnostic assessment and that diagnosis that's given. Because again, as I mentioned, we try to use all of those evidence-based practices, and that is what's going to help us determine which intervention is going to be the most beneficial for these kids, clients. And so that's generally done ideally as a team. Not always possible, especially when there's all sorts of moving parts with kids in foster care, as everyone knows, but we try and come together with as many parties as we can to come up with a good treatment goal and objective, so we all know what we're working towards.
And that's where too, I mean, we'll say it 1,000 times over tonight, but before we jump into all of this stuff, we just appreciate everything that all of you in this room do. It's hard work. And when we talk about these diagnostic assessments and treatment plans, it's a lot of terminology and acronyms and things being thrown at you. And so a lot of times, yes, that history piece is so important. But one thing that we know is, as foster parents, oftentimes you walk into the room and you don't have that information. And so I guess we just want to reaffirm that that's okay. And we really value the information that you do have, the relationships you're building with the child, even just some of those day-to-day interactions and involvements that you've noticed. All of those things are really important and helpful for us, just the same as maybe some of that history would be. So that's why we ask so many questions, to kind of get that all around understanding of the child and the environment that they were in and the environment that they are in. All right.
No, that's just a term that we kind of use of saying like this, we want it all to flow together. So when we're doing a treatment plan, we want to base our goals, our objectives, it should all tie back into that diagnostic assessment that we completed where it makes sense given the diagnosis of the child. What is our goal? What are we trying to work towards? So no, you're not missing anything. That's just
Good question.
a
Yep.
term that we use.
All connected, basically, make it make sense type thing.
Mhm. So, okay, this is not an all-inclusive list by any means of some of the different evidence-based practices that we use. We have listed here things that Courtney and I are both trained in, aside from the bottom one, which we will get into. But these are all basic interventions for children. Okay, so what I had mentioned earlier too is we have 4 therapists. So Courtney and I see primary. Well, and when I say primary, I don't think either of us have an adult on our caseload because our specialty has always been kids. But we do actually have 2 new therapists in our office whose specialty is like the older teens, adults. And so when I say this isn't an all-inclusive list of evidence-based practices that are out there for therapy, I mean, these are kind of focused around that younger child intervention. But and we won't get too much into every single one of these, but some of the big ones that we do within our office, our parent-child interaction therapy. And most recently, Courtney and I both got trained in the older child model. So PCIT in its base form is evidence-based for 3 to 7-year-olds. They did some adaptations where we can kind of translate some of those skills to the older children, which has been really fun to see. It's a really great model. There's some caveats around it, but I mean, it doesn't always necessarily have to be done with bio parent and child. Sometimes we might do PCIT with a foster parent if the placement has been established for quite some time and it's looking like it's likely going to be a long-term placement and or like maybe adoption has been identified that this is what's going to happen. It is really relationship based. So in those newer placements, we don't generally jump to PCIT with a foster parent right away, just until we kind of know maybe a little bit more long-term what the plan is. Trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy is another, I would say probably the most used intervention on my caseload with kids, TFCBT for short. If any of you guys have had any of your kids see me, you've likely been through the TFCBT model. But this is a really great model that really works through, we go through building kind of a coping skills toolkit before we even dive into the trauma. And so we really help kids become a little bit more adaptive coping before we even get into addressing the trauma. And through the trauma piece, they go through what we call a trauma narrative, where they get to tell their story in whatever perspective that they want to tell, through whatever means they want to tell. We do it over a series of sessions. Every kid, it looks a little bit different. Some kids have one trauma. Most kids in foster care have multiple traumas, right? And so sometimes, again, every kid's story looks different. The model looks a little bit different for each kid, but through that narrative, we're able to work on, any cognitive distortions or negative core beliefs about the self that have been created through the trauma to address that. And then we do that through the storytelling. We tell the story with the foster parent. Sometimes the bio parent is there once the story is completed. And it's a really nice way of kind of being able to, sum up what happened to them, but be able to now move it more into like memory phase, not triggering phase, and then moving forward into the next steps of life. So that's what TFCBT is. Child parent psychotherapy is also very brand new, as in like Courtney and I are being trained in it this week. It's a evidence-based model for infants, literally babies, all the way up to age 5. And so this is a model that is focused all around using both the child and the parent to kind of heal from any sort of trauma that may have occurred. And so it's a really cool model. It's not super well known in North Dakota. SAMHSA is actually sponsoring this training to kind of help bring this model to the Midwest because it's not very accessible around here. So I'm pretty excited about that. Cognitive behavioral therapy is your basic kind of talk therapy. We look at negative thoughts. How do we challenge those thoughts? How do we cope with different things? Courtney's going to give us a really brief overview of the applied behavior analysis therapy, or ABA. That's what we use in our behavior clinic and our autism clinic, just so we can kind of go over like what that service looks like. But any questions? I know that was like a mouthful and probably boring to hear, but these things are all like really awesome interventions truly, and to see them in action, it's really great. Again, I want to highlight, even with TFCBT, like your guys' role as foster parents is so important, even in that model, because like you guys are the ones that these kids are coming home to every single day. And they're coming to therapy and they're doing some tough stuff. They really are. And they have that safe space at home. You know, generally speaking, we don't do the TFCBT model unless we know that there's a stable environment for them to go home to, because they need that added support once they're there, or once we get into it. So, again, thank you. Your guys' job is huge in all of these kids' lives. Yeah, you can go. Yeah, here.
And I can talk loud too. Oh. Sorry for the technical difficulties. So there are handouts on the table too for everyone. Just to kind of give you, each handout is designated for each of these, with the exception of, I think, CPP on here. So take some with you. There's, I think, like 6 or 7 handouts, and we'll get more into what that looks like. There is actually a section for specifically foster parents, and how to respond to children who maybe bring up instances of their trauma, have questions about it. So take them. There's pens too. Take those. They're the good pens. So I saw that you raised your hand. What was your question?
So a lot of times I'll have a caseworker say, we're going to get them in for X on the list. Okay, so that seems to be counterintuitive to an intake process and deciding what the child needs. But maybe talk a little bit more about that. We're promised a lot.
No, I think I get what you're saying, where they'll be like, yeah, we're gonna get them in for PCIT, but like, and we get referrals all the time where on the referral, it's like, we want PCIT. And then it's like, okay, but like they've been in this foster care placement for a week. Bio parent is like not in the picture. So PCIT is not appropriate. So I think sometimes there's just maybe a misunderstanding on like the caseworker's part of like what they're referring for. At the end of the day, we make the determination as far as like what the intervention is going to be and what we find to be recommended based on that intake. If there's a diagnosis, what's been shown to be the most effective given the kid's situation. So, does that answer your question? Is that what you were kind of saying? Is sometimes they'll say that, and really what it is they're making the referral for the intake is ultimately what it ends up being.
Thanks. Sometimes I find myself asking, okay, but why are you referring? Can you tell me what you think we're going to do here? Because they might need a different therapy before mental health therapy, right? And so I guess maybe if there's any advice you have for foster parents and really just navigating, we do a lot of running. I don't want any extra running. I want what's good for the kid, but I also want it to be at the right time. So is there any advice you have for just like navigating some of these, we're going to get them right into this, and how can we advocate best?
Well, and I think Courtney and I have talked about this a few times, where it's not every kid who's been through a traumatic experience is traumatized. And so for us, when we do those intakes, there have been times where I say, I think they're maybe just checking the box, right? And maybe that is what they're doing. We got to get them evaluated, right? And we might say, like, at this time, I don't see the necessity of mental health therapy. There are maybe other avenues we should explore. OT, like things like that. What are the other things that are maybe getting in the way that are creating some of these disruptions in the home that maybe aren't actually tied to mental health? But I do think a lot of times maybe caseworkers are likely to say, okay, well, we got to get them in because, hey, they're in foster care, so something bad must have happened, right? And that's not to negate trauma, but the thing is everyone is different. We all react different to trauma. And so just because we've been through a traumatic experience doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be traumatized and need that mental health therapy.
And so, yeah, just to kind of caveat off of that, like when we say medical necessity, that means that literally if it's not necessary, we won't recommend the service type thing. So we take into account, past, present, what's going on. And there are connections that we've made with different facilities of, hey, I do think that maybe this would be more in their wheelhouse, or setting up an appointment with primary care doctor, things like that. one of the biggest things I'll point out here is, I mean, as we see, it literally says ages 0 to 5. So chances are if something big happened in the child's life, it's going to look a lot different how they express that or maybe process that. And so I don't know if there's necessarily a right or wrong time. That early intervention can make a big difference, but it's never too late to get that intervention at the same time too. So, so what we say, especially with some of those younger ages where maybe they don't have the verbal capabilities to say, hey, this happened to me and this is how I feel about it, we're probably going to start to see it in different ways. Maybe some of those behaviors, which we'll dive into later, or difficulties in school, things like that. And so that's where we're really kind of taking into account a lot of the things that aren't being said, to work with that just the same. And I mean, I use this one-liner a lot, but in therapy, one of the big things that we really appreciate with all of your communication is those day-to-day updates are huge. And so we love getting phone calls, emails, updates, just saying, hey, no updates actually, or hey, this happened at school today and it was kind of weird. Can we talk about it a little bit? Because that, I mean, you're the ones that are spending majority of the time with the child. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that toolbox, but what we say is, I mean, if we're making the toolbox in therapy, I mean, it makes sense that the foster parents know what is inside that toolbox to make some of those tools applicable. And so that's where, again, yeah, that continued communication and stuff, just to kind of identify sometimes, hey, we'll continue on with services, or maybe we'll change paths, or hey, yeah, sometimes we're looking at, we can probably start to fade out because things are kind of holding their progress a little bit too. And I don't, so this is perfect.
You know, Leslie, there's been times when I've said, they're like, okay, we're going to do this referral and you've got to drop everything. And, you know, we're going to go tomorrow at 2:15. I don't care. You have a meeting for work, you know, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, we're just not gonna. Like, I've done that where if mommy ain't happy, ain't nobody happy, because I can't, when they first come and you have 100 referrals for all these different things, and it's like, are you serious? I can't, like, I won't be in a good state. The kids certainly won't be if I'm pulling them out of school and I'm running around. And so, and then the other thing too is I tell the worker, okay, can we meet halfway? You know, we got to compromise somehow. So like, I have a great system where the county does one-way transportation, but then I want to meet and hear, you know, what's going on. So I just say what I want.
When I will speak, and I can only speak for Courtney and I can't speak for any outside agencies, obviously. But we understand, I mean, life is busy. I mean, I know even like for my own kids, sometimes like trying to balance all of their appointments on top of my job, like it's not always easy, right? I will say that, and again, I'm speaking for just us, like if there is an intake, right? And it's like, oh, the intake's tomorrow. And it's like, okay, well, I can't leave work, right? Like maybe I could hop on the phone for 15 minutes, you know, things like that. We are always open to that kind of stuff. Or even if it's like, hey, I could hop in Zoom, but like, I don't have the time to drive all the way to your office, go get the kid, you know, all of those things. So just know that like, if they're being seen by one of us, we're totally open to that flexibility, because we understand like it's tough. Like you guys have jobs outside of the job of being a foster parent too. So,
Absolutely.
so yeah, I don't know. Anything else that we want to touch base on there? No? Okay. Oh,
No, okay, I just have 2 new boys and I think one of them sees you, but like there's things at home, I'm like, oh, I wish this therapist knew that. It's like, is it annoying if I'm reaching out like, hey, this happened, or would you want to know? that?
No.
Because
it's
Nobody's
not
even
at
told
all.
us, like my caseworker, I don't even know who they're seeing, where they're going, so.
yes, we want to hear all of that. And I always tell people, I said, you're not going to probably very easily get a hold of me by phone, because I see kids back to back all day long, but you will hear from me through email. So, you don't know who they see, but if you want to take both of our business cards, you'll have both of our emails then. But yes, we want to hear about that stuff, because, you know, the majority of the time, if the county is transporting, it's either being brought by a parent aide who has almost no knowledge of the day-to-days of what's going on. Even the caseworker, sometimes, you know, some caseworkers are a little bit more involved in different case, you know, some are better than others as far as that goes. But there are case managers that'll walk and be like, nope, nothing. And it's like you get an email from like the foster parent later on. It's like paragraphs of like all the things going on. It's like, okay, cool. So like I didn't address any of that in my session, but yeah. So yes, so on my end, I don't find it like annoying or anything. Like I appreciate those reach outs because it really helps us know what's going on. It's really hard for us to evaluate is there progress being made when there isn't like a communication from, you know, like if it is the caseworker bringing them and they don't really have a clue what's going on, you know, so yes, we appreciate that communication.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have our business cards up in the box here for everyone, so we can just set them up at the table or something at the end. But yeah, no, that was a really great question. And yeah, we love the flexibility of the communication. Just adding on to that, and then we'll get off my tangent and we can continue with the PowerPoint. But I'm sure you all can relate where in foster care, things just change sometimes in the blink of an eye. Hey, they're leaving tomorrow. Hey, this is happening in 2 hours. It's happening right now. And so one of the things that we like to do too is when we know about these things that are taking place, we can help you or support you in having those hard conversations with the child as well. So we've had situations where, yeah, we have everyone in the room that's on this child's team to just kind of break some of that news and then have that therapy session after to help the child kind of process the news that they just heard. So yeah, all of us collectively working together, I mean, it's awesome. It gets some really big results, but yeah, it's tough. There's a lot going on out there too. So we've already talked a lot and we want to make sure we can get into some of those more scenario-based questions with, okay, you've talked a lot, but how do you actually handle it? I promise that's coming. So one last service that we have, this is ABA, Applied Behavioral Analysis. I'm not going to get too much into it just because that's not in our wheelhouse. What I can say is a lot of times people have questions on, okay, if ABA is recommended, but also individual mental health therapy is recommended, do I do one? Do I do both? What do I do? The answer to that is you totally can do both. In fact, I would recommend it. I use my hands a lot when I talk. So actually I'm gonna have you hold the stuff. I am gonna use my hands. So thinking about, let's say for example, a child has trauma and you come to us and you say, hey, this child is really distressed and they are, sorry, they're super distressed and when they get upset, they start to hit and they start to scream and they start to kick. Okay, so on the mental health side, so our wheelhouse, we're gonna take that individual therapy,
Okay.
thank you. Perfect. We're gonna take that individual therapy side of things and we're gonna get to the root of that trauma. We're going to still address the behaviors that are occurring, but we're gonna take more of that almost that subjective side of things. Okay, how are you feeling? Let's talk about some of these events that led to some of these behaviors. How can we do things a little bit differently? What were you thinking? Whereas this ABA side of things is going to be more of that objective, that observable, probably bringing in the rewards charts, things like that to still reduce the hitting, the screaming, the kicking, similar to what we're doing. We're just approaching it from different angles. So both of our programs have the same goal. When they work together at the same time, that's awesome because then we're just hitting it from two different angles. Thanks for the hand motion. So sorry, that was a little dramatic, but I have to talk with my hands when I do it. So that's kind of the best way I explain it. You can do one at a time. You can do both. ABA usually requires more hours at a time. So the Medicaid covers right now up to 4 hours a day for children for services for ABA, whereas your standard therapy is usually going to be that 1 hour a week type thing. Thank you, Leslie. So yeah, it's primarily known for autism, but we use ABA for mental health diagnoses as well. Another cool thing too is if a child does have a behavior, one thing that I like to tell families and caregivers is we still use that ABA approach to responding to those behaviors. So if I come into somebody's home and I'm teaching how to respond to some of these, the hitting, the kicking, things that are happening, it is very likely that somebody on the ABA side of things, our build or aim program, is also going to be responding to that same behavior in the same way if it happens on another day or time. So we all still have that background in that area as well.
And for ABA services too, within our office. So it all still goes through us. A referral over to, our offices are called Build and AIM. Build is for like the mental health, ABA, AIM is for autism. But all of that still comes through us first. So we always assess for whether or not like this would be an appropriate service for the client on top of anything we might find to be beneficial through the mental health side of things. So so it's not a separate referral. It can sometimes be, and it doesn't have to be either where it's like, oh, well, they're already established with a therapist somewhere else. So does that mean we have to switch to Solutions? And the answer is no. Like, we don't want to disrupt that relationship. We don't have to see them for individual therapy for them to be able to be referred over to the Build clinic. They will have to see us for the one intake assessment, because again, it all goes back to medical necessity, and we have to establish for these insurance companies that this is necessary for the wow, I can't talk, for the kid. So so yeah, just, I know we just got done talking about all the referrals, so I just want to make sure we all know it's not another referral.
A lot of acronyms and information.
I'm gonna give this back. I
Okay.
don't know what any of the buttons are.
All right, we're gonna cruise. Okay, so a bulk of what we're gonna talk about tonight does have to do with trauma. That's not to say that, I mean, behavior is behavior. So these things can happen whether the child has experienced trauma or not. That is just, especially with working with foster care, that's kind of the bulk of what we work with this population. But we're gonna touch on like anxiety, depression, some of those symptoms as well, and what to look for, especially in children. So I'm actually just some of these resources that we use at the top. I'm going to use this example a little bit more specifically in the next slides, but these are just kind of some of the fun interventions that we might use to provide education on what is trauma. We both use pictures of people with Legos to just kind of put a name to some of the things that are happening. We read books like this. So again, I know sometimes there's the confusion of, is this play therapy? What is this? So the answer to that is it's trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, that TFCBT, but we're using play components with that. A child's natural language is play. That's how they're going to express themselves. So again, we try to inform them, but at the same time understand that their development and that it's more fun to sometimes have information when there's toys along with it. So not necessarily play, but more so using those as tools for them to be able to express themselves and tell their stories in their own way. I put Maslow's hierarchy of needs, just that kind of refresher of, if the child is hungry, if the child doesn't have shelter, if the child doesn't have food, water, some of those basic needs, it probably makes sense why we're seeing some difficulties in school or some behavioral difficulties in other environments, just because we need to get those needs met first. And so again, we'll add it to the list of thank yous for you guys for just stepping up and being there for those children in really big times of need, and being that safe place to provide just one of the many things on that hierarchy of needs. Okay, this is really blurry, so I'm sorry. I'll try to explain what these animals are and what they're doing. I really love this picture. I use this all the time with kids when I am explaining what trauma is and what some of those trauma reactions are. So I'm actually going to go through each one of them really, really quick. But the biggest thing is that trauma reactions may look different, not only for the child, but at different times for the child. So we'll start up at the top here. This is a dog, and how they all experienced trauma in this book that we read. The difference is they all respond to the different traumas in different ways. So this dog feels really angry. He got hurt, and he's going to make sure that he never gets hurt again. So he barks really loud, and it scares the other animals in the book. So that's an example of maybe a child being really quick to anger, having some of those behavioral outbursts. This bunny, this is a really big one that we see. A lot of times the first kind of flashing lights are, oh my gosh, it must be ADHD. And it very well could be. There's still that referral that could take place for some of that evaluation. This bunny comes up a lot. And so what that means is anytime that the child is maybe reminded of the trauma, starts to talk about it, they start to fidget a lot. They start to move, they're hiding, they're running, they got to get out of there. So they have the sneakers on and they're moving. So this could look like tapping your pencil on the desk. It could look like literally getting under the desk, running out of the room, just really more so of that kind of busybody. This turtle hides in its shell, doesn't want to talk about it. We have this monkey who it's hanging onto a kind of like a stuffed animal toy. So I explain that with just kind of some of that lack of body boundaries and physical safety that we see, some of that separation anxiety, maybe wanting to crawl up onto your lap, hug your leg, not have you leave the room. That can be what we see here. The skunk, in the book, I think they call him a little stinker or something, but he sprays. And so that can just be another example of maybe children having some of those daytime or nighttime accidents. The squirrel, this is kind of what I refer to as some of that trauma dumping. So whereas a lot of these animals don't like to talk about it, the squirrel seems to talk about it a lot, and they talk about it at really inappropriate times to talk about it. And so I see a lot of you laughing because I'm sure there's been times where you're in the grocery store or wherever, and something is said where you're like, whoa, that was actually not an appropriate time to say that at all. And so that is what the squirrel does. The frog here has a lot of things that he wants to say, but all that comes out is ribbit when he tries to talk about it. This is kind of can be equated to some of that like disassociation we see. So he's just kind of lost in his own world. So again, when we talk about, okay, you're having difficulty focusing your attention, hey, pay attention, please. We think about trauma as almost like if Courtney was thinking about something and I have control of the remote control instead of her. So when we do that trauma therapy, it's almost like I'm giving Courtney that control back where she gets to choose when she thinks about it and how she thinks about it. This elephant has really sensitive ears, so he doesn't like loud noises at all. And of course, he doesn't like to talk about it either. So he hides. So all of these, I mean, you might see a couple in one child. You might see all of these in one child based on different things that they've experienced or been through, or just based on kind of their general mood for the day. So, so I really like that visual. It's helpful for me to understand and to explain. So actually it's a free website. It's called Piplo Productions.
It's by Chandra Ghosh Ibn.
Yep. It's called Once I Was Very Scared. And so there's actually a lot of different books on the website that could be helpful for different things if anybody wants to check that out.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want the mic? If you think about it, let us know. We'll come back to it. So because of that, I use that example, but then I also follow up with this. So yes, all of those reactions might look different, but the responses to the behaviors might also look different. So each of these is just some different coping skills that might help the animals. So the bunny who runs, they find a safe place and that helps them. Music and art, making friends and learning most people don't go away. So we don't feel the need to be maybe as clingy or as afraid of that. Exercising, playing with friends, having a grown-up who keeps me safe so that dog doesn't feel like he needs to be the one to keep himself safe as a child. So there's different things that we do, but there's times where I will, after I introduce this, which is right away at the beginning when we're doing that general psychoeducation on, okay, what is trauma? What does that mean? What does that look like? I will draw attention to it, to the child, and I'll tell them too, hey, I told your foster parent about the animals, so they might call you out on it too. Or, hey, I talked to so-and-so, because there's times where I hear that tone and I say, oh, it sounds like you're kind of feeling like the dog right now. You just sounded really angry when you were talking to me. Chances are they'll say, no, I wasn't. And so then we'll pull out this and say, okay, what you pick, but what can we do with that? Or, oh, I see you moving around a lot. It's looking a lot like the bunny right now. I must have said something that made you feel really uncomfortable. How can we kind of sit with that and talk through it and stay in this room? But just kind of acknowledging some of those things versus, hey, are you uncomfortable right now? Because then the answer is probably going to be no. Or if you say, how are you feeling right now when I just brought this up? The answer will probably be, I don't know. So really just kind of using these animals to tie in some of those day-to-day things that, that we see happening. Or even, hey, foster mom said that you felt a lot like the dog last night. What could we have done a little bit differently? So there's ways to kind of pull in some of your experiences as well. Okay, You got it. I just talked really fast because I'm looking at the time, so
Yeah, we have a problem with talking.
yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna just go really quickly into, when you look at behavior, we can look at the function of the behavior. All behavior has a meaning. Kids don't generally do things just to do them. So these are the 4 functions of behavior that we always look at. Escape, attention, sensory, tangible. So escape is, as it sounds, they're escape and avoid, right? Like, I don't want to do this, so I'm going to go, or I'm just going to refuse. I'm going to shut down, things like that. Those attention seeking behaviors, the really annoying sounds, or just like I'm going to be all over you no matter how many times you tell me to get off of you. It always reminds me of the like siblings where they're like, I'm not touching you. You know, that's that attention seeking behavior. Sensory is more so, you know, they're seeking sensory, whether that be through like different stimming, like things like that. And then tangible is the simple of, this is what I want. This is what I'm going to do to get it. So that's in a nutshell, functions of behavior. We're going to go into a little bit more of why it's important to know some of that.
Okay, so when we talk about the functions of behavior now, I just want to point out a few things that depression, anxiety, and trauma in children might look like. Again, this isn't everything, but these are just kind of some of those really big things. So being quick to anger, irritability, defiance, difficulty falling and staying asleep, nightmares, difficulty with boundaries and separation, difficulty concentrating and focusing attention. So really just when we see these things, asking ourselves, okay, why is this happening? What's happening right before this happens? I am about to leave the room and all of a sudden the child starts kicking and stomping their feet. Why are they doing that? It may look like, okay, they're being kind of rude. Why aren't they staying regulated? But what might be underneath all of that is they're really scared that if I walk out those doors, I'm not going to come back. So that might be some of that trauma and anxiety component coming up with all of that. I put in this iceberg here, really just kind of to display that what we see on the surface is not what is all the way underneath the surface. So one of the tools that we use in our therapy sessions is called the anger iceberg. Is that something anybody is familiar with in here? So basically just picture instead of the word success, we have the word anger up here. And underneath that, instead of these things, we have different things: foster care, abuse and neglect, not seeing mom and dad, incarceration of relatives or parents, all of these things that might incorporate or might result in this feeling of anger that's displaying guilt, shame, fear, being scared, being worried, feeling unloved, feeling just really lonely. So when we think of anger, I mean, that is a lot of times, I mean, just with kids in general, they don't have the verbal capacities or even the cognitive capacities to say, hey, actually, when this happened, I felt really confused and isolated and scared. And because of that, let's solve this situation. What comes out is anger and behaviors and either internalizing or externalizing. And so really just kind of using this visual to challenge, when we see that anger, is it really anger, or is there a little bit more to the story that contributes to some of the behaviors that we're seeing? And don't get me wrong, they're difficult to see these things. I'm not saying, hey, yeah, think about it and let's be happy about it. We will get into, with the time we have left, how exactly to handle it. But I just kind of want to validate that too, that it's frustrating and it's hard to deal with these behaviors, especially when they're happening repetitively and consistently. But those are just kind of some of the big indicators.
7:30?
7:30-ish. Oh, okay.
Okay, well,
Well, still, we
you
have a
shouldn't
lot
have
to
told
go
us
and
that
talk a
because we
lot.
still probably at 7:30 would still be talking at 7:45. So
questions
8,
on
we're
this?
good at 8?
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Any questions so far? All right. Okay.
Okay. So Abigail is asking if, as a foster parent, do you meet after sessions, and how open are you with communicating how the session actually went? She's had some experience with therapy where it was, you know, they just hear it was a good day, or and she doesn't feel like that's very helpful, or the following up with a caseworker. You know, do you follow up with a caseworker so they're aware of how things are progressing or not progressing?
So, okay, I'm gonna say that's probably a case by case and even a session by session question, because there are some sessions where I don't have a whole lot to report, like we had a good session. And there's maybe not anything that I necessarily need anyone to know about, because we maintain a level of privacy still. Even if there is a release of information that says, hey, I can talk to the foster parent, we're not gonna give every single detail of what was discussed. If there's any themes though that come up, or any skills that we talk about, like, hey, this is what we're gonna really try
Or
to do
safety.
this week. Yeah,
That's
safety
gotta
is
come up.
always gonna be communicated. If there's ever any, hey, they have some pretty tough thoughts right now and wanting to hurt themselves, like this is what we talked about for safety planning, that will always be brought to your attention. But yeah, there are gonna be some cases where, after the session might be like, yeah, it was good. Like we had a good discussion, but there wasn't anything major.
I know I've had a time where you emailed me this person's goals and like making sure, hey, just so you know, you sent out this like long email over all the goals to make sure that included what I needed to know about. So I don't think I made that session, but you emailed it in. So that is always helpful too.
Well, and since you kind of put yourself in there too, I'll say, I mean, Shannon can probably say, right? Like there's been days where like I maybe touch base with her for 5 minutes, and then there's days like today where she was in there for the entire session. So, I mean, everything it's always going to be a session by session sort of thing. And so yeah, it's hard to say yes or no as far as like how much we're gonna give, but there is, as long as there's like a need for, and again, this goes back to Courtney saying, like we can build the toolbox in the therapy office, but like it's gonna be helpful for you guys to know what's in that toolbox, right? And so we want you guys to be able to support them in using whatever skills that we're working with them on. So we want to share that sort of information, things like that. If there's any, major disclosures or anything, and again, that's a case by case basis where we might not give all the details of the disclosure, but we might say, hey, we had a pretty tough session where we talked about some tough stuff. We can probably expect to see a little bit more emotion, and here's some ways that you can support so and so. So I don't know. Did that answer the question? Was there
Yeah.
anything I missed in the question? Yeah. Courtney, you talk about that one.
Well, so going backtracking a little bit, because that's what I do. I mean, I love to also, well, we love to just even give little snapshots of, hey, we're working on challenging some of these negative thoughts. Here's the verbiage that we use. So it doesn't necessarily need to be, we're still respecting that confidentiality. Hey, they shared that they feel this way. Which again, sometimes it is important to do that. Sometimes, depending on the client, we might help to empower them to have that conversation with you. Hey, this is something that I feel is important to talk to your foster parent about. How would you like to go about this? And so seeing kind of that pride in the child's eyes, being able to advocate for themselves, that's one thing that we really like to foster, versus us calling on the phone, hey, how can we pull you into the session, whatever that looks like, phone call, Zoom call, in person. But yeah, working on some of those tools of, hey, this is what we're working on. This is how you can continue to work on it at home. If you see it come up, I have a lot of foster parents who ask questions of, okay, I get you're working on the trauma piece, for example, in session. What happens when this child asks me a question about said trauma piece at home? How am I supposed to respond to that? What do I do? So that's another thing we work on too, is I've literally pretended to be a small child in my office before, where I will role play with caregivers on like, hey, and when I start to do this, this is how you're going to respond. So we can really kind of break it down to some of that nitty gritty too of, this might be how I respond as a therapist. Let's help with how you can respond as a foster parent to still show that support to the child. As far as case managers go, as you know, with foster parents, with the system in general, things can change in a blink of an eye, and that can be really frustrating at times. And so I think I'll just sum it up by saying we try our best. We try to have that communication. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't, and that's with anyone that we're working with at any time. So I don't know, I think the biggest thing I can say is it's important, and we love to have it. So I don't know if you have anything else
Nope.
you want to add, but I mean, that's a big thing too. We want to set this child up for success as well. And so if we love to foster that communication to know, okay, what is the long-term plan of this child? Are they planning on leaving, staying? Again, how can we pull in members of the team to have those hard conversations with the child? Hopefully have some additional therapy sessions to work with the child on maybe some safety planning, different things like that. So the grand picture of things is it would be awesome if, yes, everybody knew what was going on at all times, so we could kind of paint a perfect picture for the child. But at the end of the day, everybody just kind of tries their best. Hopefully that answered their question. Okay, we're gonna, for the rest of this, kind of piggyback. So I don't know if you wanna get started.
Yeah,
Megan.
so we're just gonna kind of start going over, again, how to understand some of these behaviors that we're seeing. Triggers for behaviors, they can be literally anything. And this is, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have experienced this, right? Where like you go do something and it's going to be so much fun. And before you know it, like the kid's on the floor, like losing it. And you're like, what is happening? Like this is supposed to be really fun, right? Triggers can be anywhere. They can be smells. They can be places, sounds. They can literally be the way that a person looks, right? There's certain looks to men or women that can be triggering. And unfortunately, even for kids, sometimes they don't even know what these triggers are until, hey, like we're in like a total meltdown, right? And so just being aware of that and noting as you go. And again, and that's something that when you go back to the communication of therapy, when we identify some of these triggers, these things are going to be communicated so that we can kind of work through them. Because the goal is not to avoid triggers for the rest of our life. That's how trauma continues to be trauma, right? As we avoid the things that make us fearful and scared. And so we want to help them learn ways to cope. We want to prepare them for the things that we do know, while understanding that there might be things that we don't know.
Courtney doesn't like the saying, but you name it so you can tame it. That's what I say. And I know it's cheesy, but it helps me remember it. So we talk about them. We're going to be upfront about things that bother the child, and the goal is to help them sit with those feelings and work through it rather than avoiding some of those things.
This next one I think is a really important one, because I think sometimes what kids present us with can be so frustrating, right? And we look at them and so in this example, it uses lying, right? We are like, they are lying over the most basic thing, like, and it is killing me inside, right? And the thing to remember is that they may have used that behavior to survive in whatever setting they were in before. You know, maybe it was, I had to lie because if I told the truth about what actually happened at school, I would get beat. You know, or I had to lie because if I told the truth, then everyone would know that I was being sexually abused. You know, it could be whatever it is. That lying could have been a very adaptive behavior that kept them safe before. But now that they're in a safe environment, it's no longer a very adaptive skill for them to use. However, they can't just turn it off. And so having that understanding too of, oh, they're, you know, and I don't think people necessarily think this, but like scooting away from the idea of like, this kid's a bad kid because they're lying about everything and it doesn't make sense. And why can't they just tell the truth? What's wrong with them? But the question that we really need to be asking ourselves is what happened to them? What happened to them that makes them feel like they have to lie about every little thing that happens? And lying's not the only behavior that we see, but I think that's one that comes up a lot as a giant frustration is the lying, right?
Mhm.
And I don't know if you have another point.
Yeah, even just thinking about back to that animal picture, they're angry all the time, they're fighting. Okay, maybe fighting or that aggression was that was helpful in whatever their environment they were in. So kind of that circle of it looks different, they respond different. Yeah, it's kind of that, we'll talk a little bit again about it more, but that game of chess of behaviors, if we don't know what we're going to get, but here are some tools that that can work for that. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, another really great one for understanding behaviors is understanding structure and routine is important. However, when you first get a kid coming into your home, there's a good chance that they probably have never had structure or routine. So then you put them into structure and routine, and that's not easy for kids to all of a sudden have all of this put on them. And again, it's almost like this lying thing where it seems so basic, right? Like, why is it so difficult for you to just do some of this? But the reality is, like, they might have spent the last 10, 12, 15 years of their life just kind of surviving and getting by and not having anyone checking on them, right? Like, I've never had anyone that actually cared if I brushed my teeth. Why do you care? You know, and it comes off as these big behaviors. and there's so much more underneath there. And that kind of even goes back to if you think about the iceberg, right? So what you see on top is maybe the lying or the defiance or, you know, just being rude and kind of talking back to you about you stepping in. But what's underneath there is all of the things that happened before that have led up to this behavior. So again, though, that's not to say we don't do structure and routine, okay? Because that is, kids thrive on routine, adults thrive on routine, okay? So that's not to say that we're gonna pull back from it, but that's also, it's just, again, coming from it with the lens of, okay, how can we kind of work through this? What can we do to kind of get through this together? Anything else you want to add on that?
No, and that's where we'll tie it in with some specific examples, but all of this together, okay, we think about the trauma symptoms that might cause some of these behaviors, but then we think about the function of the behavior. I just told them that it's time to turn off the TV, and now they're really upset because they don't want to go to bed. So thinking about, okay, why is that? And how can we kind of flip the script a little bit or use our environment to our, what's the word I'm looking for, advantage, and we'll talk more about that too, but just trying to kind of tie all these concepts together a little bit too. Physical safety does not equal emotional safety. That's hard because again, well, thank you guys again. I know that a lot of times I have foster parents come into my office who don't know who the child's primary care doctor is, and that's just one more thing that they're added to the list. Okay, I don't know. I know they need these medications. I don't know where to get them, and that's one more phone call to make. And so I just want to thank you guys again for making that routine in the midst of a lot of chaos. That's a lot to do, and so I know seems easy for us to sit at the chairs and say, hey, just do a routine. It's that easy. Come on, guys. But we want our message tonight to come across as we want to be there with you. We want to walk right along your side. There's times where, okay, you can't come to me. Great. I'm going to come to you. We're going to do this. You know, we're going to, this child's having anxiety and they don't want to order something from the store. Okay, I'm going to join you guys and we're going to walk across the street to this store and work through this anxiety. So there's different, I mean, of course, there's always limitations and confidentiality and all of that, but we want to be there with you through these things. We love kind of the back and forth, almost some of those challenging questions of, okay, Courtney, you're telling me to do this, but this happened. So we really like to kind of find that gray area, take that book answer and take the real world answer and meet somewhere in the middle with all of that. So again, I know some of these points maybe seem easier said than done. Experiences in infancy and early childhood can be remembered. So one of the big things here, one of the examples I like to give, I would try not to use my hands too much when I'm giving this, thinking of that early childhood brain development as a house. And so when we think of these young children who have really have exposure to really scary and upsetting and traumatic scenarios, think of their brain developing, and those early scenarios are the equivalent of that house's foundation. Okay, so you start off, regardless of if the child can verbalize if they remember it or even process what has happened to them, even if they can remember it, just think of that foundation. So that's kind of like the pillars of the house for some of these experiences. So this child's getting older, they're going through their day-to-day life, and that house continues to develop based on the experiences that they have in their life, good and bad. So we have some good experiences. We might add some really cool floors to the house. Okay, I found this picture at TJ Maxx. I'm going to add this on the walls. Pink is my favorite color. Let's make the house look really cute and really nice on the inside. So you walk through those front doors of that house, this child's brain, and you say, wow, this house is really awesome. I love the inside. I made it my home. Everything should be perfect, right? Okay, why are we still having problems with this house then? Because things are perfect on the inside. I made it exactly how I wanted it. Well, the reality is when we think of that foundation of the house, equivalent to some of those early childhood experiences, sometimes no matter how pretty or nice or what great deals on furniture you got for that inside of the house, it looks nice at face value, but we got to go back to that foundation and we got to add some more supports there, because without that foundation, that house is not going to weather the storms that are very inevitable for the course of life. So when I communicate this to kids, I like to tell them there's nothing wrong with your foundation. I'm not saying, hey, you're coming in here and your foundation is bad. I'm just saying, let's go back and add some extra support to it. And so really just kind of validating some of those life experiences, not as good and not as bad, but just more so as they're in need of some supports right now.
Mhm. And I think that even ties back into the physical safety doesn't always necessarily equal emotional safety, because we can put all of the things around these kids. You know, we can give them a safe home, we can clothe them, we can feed them, we can give them all the things. But there's still so much work that needs to be done with that foundation. And so sometimes remembering that, where it's like, man, they're not in this chaotic environment anymore. Why are they acting like this? And the reality is because there's a lot underneath there that we need to kind of get at.
And I mean, as much as it would be awesome, behavior change takes a long time. I wish that it happened overnight. But what you'll see when we explain some of these concepts is it might take a really long time the first time, and then the next time the goal is that it takes a really long time, but a little bit less, and then a really long time, but just a little bit less, until all of a sudden you look back and you're like, wow, actually there was a change. So I wish sometimes it's a snap of the fingers, but most times it's not, and basically all the time it gets worse before it gets better with that as well.
Okay, so we're going to talk about just a few brief skills strategies that evidence-based says this is very, very effective. What I've seen in practice is these things are very, very effective for managing some of these behaviors that we've been talking about. And so the number one, which we have the golden ticket, truly, this is a golden ticket thing, labeled praise, okay? And we talk about behaviors can be changed with labeled praise alone, okay? So I'm going to use you, Leslie, okay? So if I say to you, Leslie, great job. How does that feel?
It feels okay, but kind of vague.
Yes, exactly. So it feels good to be told good job, great job. That's cool. Nice work, right? We all like being told those things. However, the way that we can shape behavior is by very specifically telling them, right? Like, Leslie, thank you so much for looking at me while I'm talking, right? Things like that, where we take it a step further and we look at some of these things that like drive us bonkers with, you know, like my kids bouncing off the walls all the time, or he's always making really loud noises. You know, we can start looking at some of the opposite things. And when we find the moments that they're doing the things we want to see them do, praise them for it. Right? Thanks for sitting with your hands in your lap. Thanks for using your walking feet. All of those positive ways of talking to the kids, that is what's going to shape their behavior much quicker than you saying, stop doing that. Stop running, stop yelling, be quiet. When we put a negative connotation to anything, it is almost always going to be met with a lot more defiance than turning it around and saying something a little bit more positive. So even if you think about a kid who's maybe running away from you, and this isn't necessarily even a praise, this is just positively stating a command versus negatively stating one. But if a kid starts running away from you and you say, stop running, okay, they might stop. They might look back at you and stick their tongue out at you and keep running, right? Or we can try, come stand by me. Right? There's a lot more positivity about, hey, come stand by me, and telling them what you want them to do right now versus what you don't want them to do. And so sometimes just flipping the switch and being a little bit more on like that positive side of how can I phrase what I'm trying to say. I got off a little bit on a tangent as far as that's not necessarily labeled praise, but again, finding those opposites for the challenging behaviors and then praising them. Good work.
Come stand by me. I need
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good one. It is a great one.
We're
Okay.
gonna put everybody on the spot now.
Yeah.
Wake up a little bit from the mac and cheese. So I
Yeah.
know we only have about 10 minutes left. Yell it out, whatever you want to do, but just to kind of get some practice. So problem behavior, this kid hits all the time. What would be a labeled praise you could give them?
When they're not
for
hitting.
When they're not hitting.
We're not going to praise them for hitting,
You
for
got
the
it.
record.
Thanks. Thank you for using your safe hands.
Yes.
Thanks for keeping your hands to yourself. I really like that you're playing gently with the toys right now, catching those little moments. And when we say little, we mean it might be very little, like they actually might be on their way to hit their brother or their sister, and
But they paused
they
for half a
pause for
second to
just
think
a
about
split
it.
second and you catch it. So
Sometimes when you do this, they start doing it with each other too. So in our home, we switched to this, I don't know when you taught me, but then the kids started doing it too. So one kid would be arguing, the other one like, good job ignoring them. You're doing fantastic. And I'm like, they're doing it for me. So it does work really well.
It really is. And that's actually another point too, is that You can use the other people in the home to your advantage here. We can use what we call proximal praise. So, you know, if like Courtney's rolling around on the floor being just super disruptive, you know, during dinner time, and we have Leslie over here who's sitting down eating very nicely, right? I can be giving my attention and praise to her, like, great job sitting at the table eating, right? And I'm giving her my attention. I'm not doing it in like a snarky way by any means. I'm just gonna pour more of my attention into her versus saying, Courtney, get up to the table, get up to the table. I said, get up to the table. And then what we look for is, because kids, they hear it. They hear everything that's going on, right? We all know that. So she's rolling around on the floor. You can tell she's a great actor. She's rolling around on the floor and she's hearing me say all this praise over here. She's gonna probably like start crawling her way back up to the table. And as soon as she's at the table, then Courtney, thank you so much for coming and joining us at the table. We're not even going to address the fact that she just rolled on the floor for the last 10 minutes, because what's the point? She's at the table now and that's what we want her to do.
A natural consequence, if I'm the one crawling to the table, that's going to be more physical exertion on my end anyways, right? So you guys just eat your dinner in peace, knowing that I'm doing a lot of physical work that doesn't need to be done.
Yeah.
Crawling to the table for attention that I'm not receiving in the first place. It could be very small too, like the second I look up, oh, thanks for looking over at the table, Courtney. I can see that you're looking at the food and we're really excited to eat with you. That's probably going to make me start to roll on the ground again. You can almost guarantee it. And
Yeah.
I'm going to start to roll really aggressively. You go back to proximal praise then, then you
Yep.
keep noticing all the other people. So we'll get into that ignore concept too, but that's kind of a little example. I'll be the runner.
We literally had a situation in our house like this last night where we had to confront one of our kids, one of our foster kids, with a consequence for something that they weren't doing. And it was dinner time. And the choice for this child at that time was, I'm not hungry. I don't feel like eating. I'm gonna start eating dinner. And all of a sudden, 45 minutes later, she's been through 3 courses of meals. You know, it's just like one of those things, like you just go on with your life and don't pay attention to the negative behavior. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great example of how, you know, we don't have to give a lot of attention to the fact that like for the last 45 minutes, they were doing whatever they were doing. And again, like when we get, and we're kind of getting in now more, I guess, into like ignore here, but like when we're ignoring certain things and not giving them our attention, it's not saying like, hey, we're cool with this behavior, but what we're doing is we're just reshaping the way that we're going to give them our attention is really all it is, because a lot of these behaviors are done for attention. And so it's better for us to reshape that for them, give them the attention from the positive standpoint, because each time is going to get shorter. And that's what Courtney was talking about earlier. Sorry, not later. You know, each time, the time in between the refusal or whatever it might be is going to get shorter. So even the dinner table example, you know, maybe she rolls on the floor for 15 minutes and then gets up to the table, and I'm praising her, great job coming up to the table. Now tomorrow on the floor for 10 minutes. Next night, 5 minutes. It's going to eventually get to the point where she's just going to come to the table, because she's learning that it's much easier for me to get the attention that I want if I just get to the table and sit down right away. This is no longer working for me. And so, yes, so that's getting into ignore. And I don't know if you want to rewind and actually explain what ignore is, because I didn't do that. I just jumped into it.
So just really quick, we don't just call it ignore. We call it active ignoring, selective ignoring. And the reason for that is because it's a lot of work to ignore. It's frustrating. You know, I say from sitting in my chair, there's times where, yes, as comfortable as I am with behaviors, my heart is beating fast too. And so we're in the grocery store, we're, you know, just get in the car. I've had a long day too. You know, some of those moments where behaviors are not ideal to take place. And so when we say we're not just walking away and leaving the room when we ignore, we are waiting for an opportunity to praise. I was really proud of this fishing picture today. So thinking of these two components have to be used together at the same time in order to be effective. You have to use labeled praise with selective ignore. We can't just ignore and walk away. We have to be ready to catch those moments. I was just telling Courtney today in my office, I've had kids who are sprinting through the halls. The second they're taking maybe 1 or 2 steps, even if they're literally tripping and they don't mean to take 1 or 2 steps, that's what I'm saying. Hey, thanks for using your walking feet. We can kind of use the example of kicking the walls if you want to. It will turn into a game. It will get worse before it gets better. We use the terminology extinction burst. The key is we have to write it out. I've had people warn their neighbors because they're like, I live in an apartment. Like, I can't be doing this, having, people banging on the walls. I'm going to get kicked out. We have walked through how to go knock on the neighbor's door and talk to them about, hey, just so you know, I've told people name drop me. Courtney Leben told me I had to do this. I don't want to be doing it either. I think this is ridiculous. I'm embarrassed to name drop us, blame it on us, but follow it through to the end. So warn those neighbors, tell other people, I don't know what's going on. And we'll kind of problem solve too in session, or even just, outside of whatever, just to kind of talk through if and when this happens, what can we do type thing. But again, I just want to validate that it's hard. It's hard to ignore. It's a lot of work to ignore. We're waiting for that opportunity to give that labeled praise, even if it's just a nibble. It might be a missed catch. You might be giving a labeled praise as they are back to some of those attention-seeking behaviors, and that's okay. It's just kind of part of the process because kids move quickly and behaviors happen fast.
Mhm. I always tell parents when I'm working with them, we're ignoring the behavior, we're not ignoring the child. And so that's why I've had multiple parents come in when we start talking about ignore, they'll be like, I'm great at ignoring. I'm like, okay, cool. So like behaviors are gone then. They're like, well, no. I'm like, okay, so clearly we're not doing something, right? Like maybe we've mastered walking away and tuning out completely to what's going on, right? And sure, that's maybe taking a break. And sometimes we need those moments, right? Like if we're about to lose it, like we might need to walk away for a few minutes. But the thing is in order for selective ignore to work, we have to be there to praise them when they start doing the behavior that we want them to do, right? So like if Courtney's rolling around on the floor at dinner and I just walk away and don't wait for her to come sit at the table ever, she's probably just going to keep rolling on the floor and doing whatever she wants to do, right? And so we have to ignore just the behavior, not the kid. Like Courtney said, it is a lot of work. One thing that Courtney and I talk a lot about in our office is you're putting in the energy one way or the other. So you're either going to put the energy into the behavior by trying to correct it by saying, don't do that, and them not listening, and then having to maybe follow through with a consequence or this, that, or the other. Or we're going to put in a few days of some rough energy to try and ignore some of these behaviors that then long-term we no longer have to spend any of our energy on. And so, that's one thing to consider. Going back to also, it gets worse before it gets better. When we start talking with parents about this, we say, let's not just go ignore all the things, right? Because again, it will get worse before it gets better. So we target one behavior at a time. Okay. So if maybe dinner time is one of the times, right? That's what we're going to target until we kind of get that under control. And then we might move on to something else. We're not going to just start ignoring everything all at once because you will burn yourself out and you will end up giving in at some point because you won't have that energy to continue going. And the thing is an example I use a lot is, let's say you have someone at dinner just tapping the table, right? Super annoying, right? But they're used to like getting that attention where you're like, Courtney, stop tapping the table, right? Now we're going to start ignoring it. Okay. And when we say it gets worse before it gets better, it will, because now it's going to like turn into like this, maybe even like kicking.
The other kids at the table are joining in.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun.
And we're going to keep ignoring, even though we want to pull our hair out, right? The key is though, as soon as they stop, we say, thanks for having quiet hands, or thank you for having your hands in your lap, however you want to phrase it. But if we start giving in when it's like, I've had it, go to your room, this is it, and that's when we give in when it's loud, and it's more extreme. Now we've just taught them, all right, my baseline is to start with kicking. And now I know that if I continue to persevere through this, at some point I'm going to get their attention. And so that is where, like, when we are picking behaviors to ignore, you really have to think through, what can I tolerate to start? Because if it is not a behavior that you can commit to, it will not be successful. And it's hard. I mean, I say all the time, I'm a PCIT trained therapist, and I swear to God, there's days where I am about to lose it at home and I don't have the energy to ignore my 4-year-old sometimes, right? It is hard. It is hard work. And so just being very mindful of, if you're going to try out this tactic where it's like, wow, that seems so cool and pretty simple. Like, it really does, but it can be tough. But it is one of probably the most successful interventions out there, that once you get good at it, it's pretty good.
And yeah, we'll just kind of reiterate on that. This is a very like baseline. I know that we're like basically out of time. So this is like the surface level of stuff. So there's a lot more information on this out there. One of the sheets is actually just some different examples of labeled praises you can use. So this is, I wish that we could say, hey, congratulations, you're officially trained in labeled praise and active ignore. It's a process. We still work on it. But it's just kind of understanding, okay, what are my limits as well? So I have had families lock up some personal items. Hey, this is my grandma's picture that I do not want to get broken. I do not want this to get destroyed. Those things, thinking about what is in my environment that I know will be an easy trigger for me, and how can I plan ahead for that? How can I move some of those things in preparation for behaviors that may or may not take place, and attention that I may or may not have to give to a situation. Of course, we're always adding that we're always giving attention to safety scenarios that are, you know, impacting the family or the child. But yeah, just kind of thinking about some of those things as well. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. No, you got it.
Have you ever run into situations where, say, your own therapy or someone else's therapy along the way might empower the kid to use those tools against the parental figure? Like, I had one kid who started quoting things that he had to have heard in therapy to explain why he was allowed to do the things he was doing, you know? So it's like something someone said to him along the way empowered him to continue acting the way he was acting. So I guess, how do you combat that, you know?
What I wonder is if a little bit of that is like manipulating the situation and what they were told. Again, I can't speak for any other therapist. I can't even speak for Courtney. I can say that I don't know that I've ever told a kid like, you have every right to act this way, right? What I'll validate them and say, I get that, right? Like, I understand what you're going through. But I don't know that there's ever gonna be a time where I'll tell a kid like, yeah, it's totally fine if you act that way because you've been through X, Y, and Z, right? Yeah, and so that's where I'm wondering if there was maybe a little bit of twisting of words there, where it's like in the therapy process, it was probably like, wow, I understand like why this happens. Like, I get it. We're not saying that it's cool that you keep doing it. We got to find other ways to deal with this. So
We think about that trauma too as, I mean, we go back to the beginning where we said structure and routine is super, super important. And so when we talk about, yeah, these things happened, and again, we can't speak for anyone, these things happened to this child. And yes, that's really, really hard. And sometimes those structures and routines that you're implementing at home might feel really harsh. But another thing we like to say is you're not being harsh, you're being really clear. And so despite them saying possibly like, hey, this happened to me, so therefore I may or may not be able to do this, just, you know, repeating some of that, hey, these are the expectations, this is the structure, this is the routine. It will get worse before it gets better, but avoiding those power struggles at all costs would be my biggest recommendation.
No, we're not using that.
mhm.
We're
Mhm,
gonna do this anyway.
mhm.
But this particular child, I definitely had trouble not getting in the power struggle. I
Sure.
learned a little bit
Mhm.
past that.
And it's
Yeah.
good that you understand your own triggers too. That's huge. Hey, this really, you know, bothers me. And therefore I know that if and when this happens, I can prepare myself for it because it is a trigger point for me.
Mhm.
Okay, do they have access to the PowerPoint by chance? Is there a way to, okay. Perfect. So
Okay.
we have just a few slides left. This is just a video, very simple, on what that active ignore and labeled praise can look like. We did go a little bit into detail on like some of those rewards charts, and tips for it. But we don't want you guys hanging out here all night. So, we have our cards. Does anybody have any other questions before we close up, unless you wanted to touch base? Oh, yeah.
This takes too long to answer, then just say it, just skip it. But okay, when somebody RSVP'd, they asked, do you have any strategies to help with the bio kids in the home with their mental health when you're having foster kids come in the home?
That is a very good question. I mean, there's a lot of different, I mean, I think sometimes still setting aside some time, some special time is special one-on-one time or family time, however, your family might, want to do it. I think that's really important. I think it's always important to create space for your kids to share how they're feeling, because it is, you know, it might be fun and exciting, but it's also, they're going through the, you know, if you've, a lot of you guys, I'm assuming, have had some kids leave your house, right? And whether it's planned, unplanned, whatnot, there's a lot of emotions, good, bad, in between, that go along with it. And if us as adults have those feelings, we can only imagine kind of what it's like for the kids, right? Who maybe aren't as emotionally developed as the adults are. And so I think always creating that open space for them is a great, I guess, opportunity too. I don't know if you have any other tips on it.
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, case by case, it's hard,
Yeah.
you know, just kind of educating on some of the dynamics. We read the book Maybe Days with kids a lot, that kind of explains the role of children in foster care and the different people that play into that part. But yeah, some of the, I mean, sometimes I wish that we had the magic words, but really all we can say sometimes is it is hard, because it just is. And I haven't been in your shoes personally, but again, it goes into that. Thanks for welcoming all of these different dynamics into your home, because it is a lot.
Would this be a situation with the selective ignoring and active praise where if you have a kid, I think it was the squirrel in the book who's just talking and just be like, you know, I was raped by my dad just at the dinner table, you know, is that like you kind of just actively ignore, but then when they get back on a good topic, then, oh, thank you so much for sharing or something, or
So that's actually in one of the forms too, where it talks about like if a child says this, part of what our training, and if you want to add to this too, is the biggest thing is being part of that support is wanting to communicate to the child that you are there for them in those times that you know they have experienced in some of those really emotional. So if we turn our back, that might communicate, hey, this isn't acceptable to talk about at all. Maybe it might elicit some of those feelings of shame or guilt, etc. However, we still have that healthy balance of when is it appropriate and when is it not. And those are all things that we do address in therapy sessions as well, of, hey, this is when should we, these are the private part rules, for example, but when should we talk about those, or where should we handle these situations type things. And so again, case by case, and I don't know if you want to jump into that, but even just as simple as, hey, thanks for sharing, however, it's dinner time and now the expectation is that we're sitting at the table type thing.
I would say yes, case by case. And if you think back on like the functions of the behavior that we went over, you can ask yourself, what's the function of them doing this at the dinner table? Is it for attention? Is it because like right here in this moment, they just felt so compelled to share this information? Again, I think they always have to have that established boundary though ahead of time. You know, like if it happens after the first, I wouldn't ever recommend probably ignoring it the first time by any means, because you have to set that boundary with them right away and saying, you know, this actually, you know, I'm really glad that you shared that. You can give that labeled praise right there. Thank you for sharing that. You know, let's talk about this after dinner, you know, where maybe you and I can talk one-on-one instead of around everyone else. And then in the future, you know, you might establish like, okay, why does this keep happening? Why is it happening at dinner? Are they looking for attention by saying these things? Things like that.
Or communicating to the child, hey, I heard that you said this. I appreciate that you said it. However, how can we work together, you know, pulling them off to the side? How can we plan where next time that you need to get my attention and it's something important, let's talk about what would be appropriate to say at the dinner table in front of everyone and what might be a way that you can let me know that we just need to talk one-on-one. So having some of those, hey, we're going to practice it, kind of some of that role playing of, or what symbol can you give me to let me know that we need to have a serious conversation.
It's 7:56. We're never going to get invited back.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I have to cut you off because I have to pick up my son and this is my computer and I can't leave it
Everybody's
here.
like, we have lives, let's go.
But
Thank
you guys
you.
can ask questions offline. Paige, I'm gonna let you wrap us up. I'm gonna cut our online audience off because everything we're doing now is just in room only with some prize drawings. So sorry you weren't here, but you should have been here in person. Here you go, Paige.
Great, thank you so much. Good information. Thank you so much. Thank you. Huge thank you to Grace Lutheran Brethren for their generous donations and support for us. I think that's it.